There are so many times people come to me and they ask, "Hey, Timotheus, how long does it take you to prep a sermon? You preach, upwards of 70 times a year in all these different places to all these different people. How long does it take you to prepare? How do you prepare?" And so I communicate that either my process is not at all or it's my whole life. And the reason I said it is that it's very organic. I don't sit down and say, "Oh, I need to preach at this place. I want to talk about this thing." What happens is my trigger comes from the text as I read through the scriptures, and as that trigger, what it does is it leads me outside of me toward heaven, toward God. God then leads me back to where I can then employ whatever He has communicated through the text. And so, but not everybody has to use what I do. That's just one of the things that I do. Is called living with the text. I got that from a good friend named Mike Dunlap. So I live with the text and then preach from the trigger that comes from the text. There are other homiletic loops, though, other homiletic triggers that come from the text. And so my friend Chris Johnson happens to be the pastor of Divine Unity Community Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And today, as he told me he was sermon prepping, I asked him what loop he would use, what homiletic loop he would use. And so he took me through his loop, and you get the unique opportunity to see us dialogue what sermon prep looks like organically, how we go from having a message to actually being a message. And so you'll see exactly what we say and how we talk about it, and it's going to be very transparent, very open. And so I'm hoping that this is helpful to you as you think through how to proclaim God's message from up front. And then, again, this is happening before the preaching event. Likely by the time you see this, the preaching event will have already occurred. So it behooves you to go and actually listen to the message to see what God did and how God moved myself and how He moved Chris throughout the preaching event, because the preaching event, like I said, would have already happened by the time you see this. So enjoy this conversation. Hope you can learn from it. And as always, chew up the meat, spit out the bones.
Show you my loop and kind of what I'm working with here. So here's the loop. I'll zoom in a second and walk you through it. But like I said, qualifying grace. This is closing out the Amazing Grace series for us, and title "Don't Waste the Grace." My sticky statement or bottom line is my past sins disqualified me, but His grace qualifies me for my future. Something like that. It's a word that I'm not getting in there, but it's like I was disqualified by my past sin, but I'm qualified for my future by His grace. And the idea is to push people into not wasting grace, not sitting on grace, but as Paul said, and the grace of God was not in vain towards me. I labor harder than all the others, yet not I, but the grace of God that is in me. So here's the loop. My oops is the fact that we are all disqualified by our past sin. Me analyzing, that's upsetting the equilibrium. I'm going to talk about just an intro of what it looks like to be qualified, what it looks like to be disqualified from something. Still working on that. I moved down to analyzing the tension. And in this section, I'm looking at what Paul said. I'm the least of the apostles. I'm the least of these, not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church. So looking at the geopolitical things that came with him persecuting the church, and then and that was his past, how he consented to people's death and things like that. Then it's moving from Paul's past to our past or your past. Either way, the result, you might not have persecuted the church, but here are things that we've been caught up in. Here are things that we have done. Here's who we were. Pre-grace, this is who we were. This is what we struggled with. This is what we did. Whether it's Paul's past sin or your past sin, the result is disqualified. Then the aha, which is a clue to the resolution, which is going to bring us to more so experiencing the gospel, is but by the grace of God. I am what I am. I am what I am by the grace of God. So then I'm kind of talking about just that scandalous, marvelous aspect of grace. Qualifying grace will qualify who it wants, when it wants. And Paul talks about the difficulty that other people had with him being saved, and now going from persecuting the church to promoting the church, but by the grace of God. And so I'm bringing in some things from Paul's testimony in Acts 22. Acts 22, Paul really shares more of his testimony and talks about the difficulty that people had with him now being a witness, a preacher of the resurrection. So us experiencing the gospel is that we recognize now through Paul's experience that qualifying grace changes who I am, what I do, and how I do it. Changes who I am. I am what I am by the grace of God. What I do. Now he's become a witness. That's pulling from Acts 22. But also that this is what he preached. He says that in 1 Corinthians 15 as well. And then how I do it. The fact that he says, and God's grace was not in vain. And so now I am a work of grace, and I work not for grace, but from grace. And because of grace, I work all the more. So my hope is that something would be unlocked in people to move from just recipients to conduits of what God is doing, so that we are qualified by his grace, not by our skill, not by our competency, not by our past pedigree, and we are not qualified by those things, nor are we disqualified by our sin, disqualified by our past, disqualified by our struggle. But by grace, I am who I am, and I do what I do the way I do it by grace. It's only by God's divine involvement in my life I can be who I am. I can do what I do the way that pleases him. So,
Hey man, I absolutely love that. I'd love to preach that message. And it sounds like you're gonna have a lot of fun preaching that message. Two questions. Question one, on the disqualifying part, and you probably do this every message, but this is just a question. What are you going to talk about as far as Chris Johnson is concerned that made you feel disqualified? Do you ever feel disqualified as a pastor now? Do you ever think to yourself, man, I'm the least, if anybody shouldn't be pastor, it's me. I immediately thought, as you were talking about how many times we had conversations about not wanting to plant a church, not wanting to be a pastor, not wanting to do those things, and then we went the whole opposite direction, and both of us did it. I never forget having a conversation with you on my way to Hampton to preach with Ed, that I remember I was going down around the bridge in Hampton, and I basically said I didn't want to talk about planting a church or anything because I didn't want to talk about it. You were like, hey man, I've never heard you do anything like that before. And it was a clear indication God was going to be doing something with me with that whole thing. But anyway, that's my question.
hey, bro. Yeah, man, that's good timing for your question. I did not have that written out yet. I'm currently in the sanctuary. This is where I do my prayer prep. You know what I mean? At this point, it's like I'm praying through it, and for the actual ministry moment, you know, you can have the content message, but it's like the ministry moment. So your question is very timely, man. You know, I think you just helped me with the analyzing the tension versus talking about the disqualifying past, just talking about the ways we feel disqualified. The way Paul felt disqualified was because of his past sin. And the way I feel disqualified would be, to answer your question and helping me process as well, is really, man, never thought I'd be a pastor. Number two, never thought I was articulate enough to, you know, publicly speak. There are insecurities. There's idiosyncrasies. I have certain proclivities that I have to continue to confess. And even though I preached about sufficient grace last week, I think it's a reminder to me, your question is a reminder to me, that God's call to salvation was also a call to ministry for me that I didn't even realize. I just wanted to live right. So I constantly felt that tension of, I never planned to do anything. I just wanted to be saved. And I never thought I was worthy to do anything. And so for Paul to say, I'm the least of these, like, I'm not worthy, that's a reality that I live in, honestly, bro.
Homie, I'm gonna let you do your prayer prep, but boy, listening to you say that, I mean, everything else that I heard you say before, that'd have been a dope message for me to hear. And that part right there, being in it, is a dope message for me to receive. And not that I could not have received it before, and not that you wouldn't have preached that anyway, but that right there is to me that powerful, that heavy hitting, that, oh man, Pastor Chris feels like that. Because to me, when I hear you preach, even when I heard you articulate what you're preaching, I'm like, man, this dude can preach the paint off a wall. Every time I hear you preach, I'm super impressed at your preaching, and tons of people have told you that. And so to hear that is something that has meant something to you, or to hear, like the way that you said, man, I wasn't expecting to do anything. I'm like, man, to go from that to where you are now, I just know that will be super encouraging to somebody in the audience. It's encouraging to me, and I'm in full-time ministry, and I've known you for going on 12 years, or however long it's been, 13 years, because I think we met in 2007. So it was a huge encouragement to me to hear that from you, because I consider you one of those people that I look at and go, man, see, that's what God does when people just avail themselves to Him, regardless of where they've been, regardless of what they've done. Like, that dude is surrendered to the Lord and being used by Him. And so, yeah, it's so crazy to know that you and your doctorate know all of that stuff, but still, preaching-wise, while you do things differently, you still preaching the lights down like you always have. It's just to me, it's different, but it's not. I mean, to me, it's still just as powerful, still just as insightful, still just as vulnerable, still just as godly, still just as bibliocentric. And so I love that.
No, brother, you're not holding me up at all, man. I have continued to, those words are really, really encouraging. And dog, I almost started tearing up, man. I was like, man, I'm glad I'm gonna let my page bleed. Like, I'm gonna let my page cry, like, as I'm typing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think, hearing the affirmation of somebody that you respect, somebody that you admire, and the very things that you said about me, like looking at somebody who could like, I look at you like that. And so to hear that come back, I'm like, wow, okay, I can even hear it more. It hits me in a deep place, and it's making this message come alive. And so the other part I was going to say, I'm also realizing that what prayer looks like for me is not, always just this solemn by myself. It's like prayer happens in community, that it is this communication from God, that I believe God is speaking through you, even in this time, and it's helping me lock closer in and remove the secularizations that are already in my mind. And essentially that prayer helps us ascend to that place, like stripping off ourselves, laying things at the feet of Jesus. And when the right people are in company, man, I do believe, that it is 2 or 3 gathered in His name, you know what I mean? And so I appreciate that, man. That's why, even when you said, hey, Marco Polo me, I was like, man, there are times when the right person needs to kind of enter into that moment with you. I just finished preaching about Joshua and Moses, and how Moses just invited Joshua, just come with me, get away from the camp. You know what I'm saying? Just enough so you can hear the echoes of what God is speaking. And then Joshua knew how to stay in the tent, which is one of my life messages. So nevertheless, man, yeah, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, man, you just gave me a lot of ammunition to approach this thing, man, to be vulnerable before people. Because I think sometimes my vulnerability will come out in the sense almost like vicariously, like as I'm up there, I can't help but connect with people. But when I write it in, like you said, that heavy hitter, that deeper, now I'm like, okay, I'm speaking to people from my testimony, as Paul did. You know what I mean? It was even cool last week. Somebody and I shoot you this picture. Somebody sent me a picture. It was an aerial shot, kind of the sanctuary on Sunday. I had this yellow hoodie on, and you could see me out front. And there's that, man. When I saw this, I just thought about the whole piece. You know, when Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ," and I'm seeing you follow Christ, and look at the people that's following you. And dog, man, that joint almost buckled my knees just out of sheer humility of like, hold on, what's happening again? What are we doing here? Like, hold on, it's not just a task. Like lives are being changed by the good news of Jesus, and He's using an imperfect vessel. So, man, I appreciate that, man. That just helped me. It helped me so much, bro.
Dude, that's awesome. Please send me that picture. Vulnerably sharing with you. When you described the picture to me, I almost teared up. And it takes me back to Buttonwood Court, and it takes me back to all those conversations we had. It takes me back to Camp Souls on the water. You know what I mean? Like, it takes me back to all of these places where, and at those times, man, those were the times in my life where I felt super disqualified because I had hurt God so much, and I thought He had put me on the shelf so many times that I was like, "Yep, I just messed up too bad. Like it's over." And this is inside of grace, right? Like outside of grace, surely I failed, but then inside of grace, I messed up so much that I was just like, I got to be disqualified. Like there's no way there's no way God's still gonna use me. And so just thinking through that, I want to see that picture because just thinking about the image itself, man. When I walked into the sanctuary and I busted into tears because it's just like, this is what God saw when He was working with us all them years ago. This is what He saw before He said, "Let there be light."
Yeah, I was in all tears that Sunday, man. Like I said, man, you begin to see people that you fought for in the faith. You see the testimonies of folks, man, and like me seeing like that, like the people that you poured into, disciple, prayed, and like to see them soaring. Dog, it's like overwhelming, man. And so, yeah, I'm with you, man. God is so good in so many ways, man. So, again, thank you, brother, for walking with me, man. Every time you remind me of the water, I'm reminded of Richard Pryor. I know that sounds crazy, but Richard Pryor, who said, you know, water got a funny way of bringing back your memory. He said, my kids was out there swimming in the pool, and they jumped in and said, Daddy, jump in, get in the water. He said, I jumped in that water, and then all of a sudden the water reminded me, you can't swim. So every time I think about that water moment, man, it is sufficient grace that God kept me. But it was such a learning lesson to learn how to depend on others and take risk, that even to this day, like that's such an iconic faith story for me that, you know what, I got out there on that raft and got flipped over, and one of my greatest fears, I was in the middle of the water and nowhere near the end, yet there was help, yet there was community, and so it helps me take big steps of faith now, brother.
So I hope you enjoyed that video and got to see that process from beginning to end of how we go into the text and from the text then get triggered that moves us toward God and then back toward ourselves so we might be the truest version of ourselves. And again, not everybody has to live with the text like I live with the text. Some people can have different hermeneutic triggers, different homiletic loops, and you saw that. I would tell you, go to Divine Unity Community Church's YouTube page and then watch this past Sunday's message called Qualifying Grace by Pastor Chris Johnson. And then again, you will be able to see how the Lord used the preaching